Hey, and welcome back. Is games an art or business? This question has been discussed for over decades. And well, there are different opinions. But if you are a part of the game industry, I hope you are enjoying what you are doing. And of course, well, everybody would like to to make a successful product and make money with it. I'm going to introduce one of the most interesting panels of our conference, and I hope you will enjoy it. And it will be devoted to monetization, monetization the right way. Let's welcome our speakers. Hello, guys.
Hey, Julia.
Hey, good to see you. So I will introduce the moderator. It's David from AppLovin, and you guys take it from here.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, everyone. My name is David. So I'm the manager of business development here at AppLovin, where I work with our developers based out of France to help them monetize and grow their games. And I'm going to be your moderator today. So now a couple words about AppLovin if you're not too familiar with us. So we are a marketing software company. And what we really do is that we provide a set of tools for developers so they can grow their mobile apps. What it means is that we help them market, monetize, analyze, and publish their apps. So in today's session, we're going to discuss what is the best way for casual and hyper-casual games dev to monetize their games through in-app bidding, how they can increase their profit through ads, and also we're going to be talking about the UA element here and how to scale through user acquisition. Joining me today is going to be Tom Bishop, Strategic Partner Manager at Facebook Audience Network, Nate Parker, Director of Business Development at Kolibri Games, and Adi Shalom, who's the Director of Monetization at Huuuge Games. So they are going to share how they have seen success with mixing ad revenue with in-app purchases in a hybrid monetization stack. How are you guys?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Cool. So I guess maybe what we can do is that you guys can give a quick introduction about yourself and your company. Tom, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. I work at Facebook on the Audience Network. So we help power monetization for developers all across EMEA and across the world. So obviously that's on the ad monetization side of things, revenue in your pocket, but it's also about how we hit key performance metrics elsewhere across your business.
Thank you, Tom. Nate, do you want to go?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, David. It's nice to be here. I work on the business development side of Kolibri Games. We were acquired by Ubisoft 1 year ago. We're based in Berlin. We're about 150 people. Our primary focus is idle games. That is our bread and butter, and we love them so. We have 7 idle games released. We're most well known for Idle Miner Tycoon, but we also have Idle Firefighter Tycoon and Idle Restaurant Tycoon that were released in the past year and are doing quite well.
Thank you, Nate. Adi?
Yeah, so pleasure meeting you all. So Director of Ad Monetization here at Huuuge. The company is well known for the slot games that we have, but over the last few years, heavily branching out into the casual space. Also Midcore recently. A company of 600 employees, roughly 10 offices worldwide, more or less.
Thank you, guys. So I guess we can go back to you, Nate and Adi. Can you tell me a bit about how many people do you have dedicated within your monetization and UA team? And what is the kind of structure you have in place?
Sure, I can start. If that's okay. So on the monetization side, or I guess starting at kind of like the total UA side, user acquisition is about 13 people within within Kolibri Games. And I'll just kind of preface this and say that like in other parts of Ubisoft, the structures are somewhat different. So it really depends on the studio. But just within Kolibri Games, we're 13 people there and 3 that are specifically outside of the 13, so an additional 3 that are specifically working in ad monetization. On the user acquisition side, that split is actually between ad creation, new games, and then folks who are specifically looking at Idle Miner Tycoon. So Idle Tycoon for us is such a huge game that we put a lot of resources just looking at that. In the monetization team, so I mentioned there are 3 people. There's one person who is solely dedicated to that, who's working on that full time, and he's mostly actually working on some of our newer games, setting up new waterfalls, optimizing them, and managing the networks that we're working with. And then 2 other folks. One of them is myself, so I work on some other business development related topics. And then another person who is doing part-time on ad monetization, but then part-time on IAP monetization. So I think we'll talk a little bit about it later, how he was able to sort of make that transition. But we're able to kind of like balance out all of the work there. And then of course there's like team members who are working on data and other topics and infrastructure topics that touch ad monetization, but aren't specifically part of that team.
We will for sure. Thank you. Adi, how does that work at Huuuge?
Okay, so here we have roughly 45 people in the marketing team, split into mostly on the focus areas, meaning on the UA side, we have a social team, we have SEM, we have media and networks, affiliates, we have retargeting, we have cross promotion and ad monetization, obviously. Creative is quite large for us, actually. On the ad monetization side, we have 4 people at the moment, including myself. So pretty much managing all games A to Z. So the core franchises that we have, the largest titles, all the publishing games that we have. So we have a constant flow of new games in the company all the time. So also have a very decent flow of games that we are currently adding and the team is optimizing for. The team itself is also doing partially cross promotion inside the ad monetization mechanics. Other than that, pretty much the same operation. So all the optimization of the waterfalls, the beaters, talking with the networks, working closely with the studios on the integration itself, all the integration inside the game itself. So we're close with the studios to make that as efficient as possible.
Cool. Okay, so I guess before we get into the topic today, Tom, maybe can you give us a quick update on the major monetization model you see on the market for mobile games right now? And maybe what are the kind of main differences within those approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, to start with, we've got all the different genres, but I think a way we tend to look at it on the Audience Network is breaking it into IAP publishers. They only do IAP, IAA, they only do IAA, and obviously the ones in the middle. Now, on either end, there's different challenges. And actually, I think so it's something like 85% of game developers use a hybrid monetization approach. But if you're either of the publishers on different ends, you've got real challenges. So if you're IAP first, how do you put ads in a way that doesn't harm your in-app purchases side of things? On the other side of the coin, you've got the IA publishers, and how do they gradually implement IAPs without harming the in-app advertising too? And those are real challenges that we can help publishers with.
Cool. So Adi, is that something that Echo at Huuuge Games, do you use a mix of ads and IAP? And also maybe you can talk a little bit about the split you're seeing on your games between ads and IAPs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have, I think, anything between 95% in-app purchases for some games, and for other games, we actually have the opposite. We have 95% ad monetization, pretty much anything in between. So one of the benefits from having a variety of genres of game, pretty much everything from games that are only rewarded videos, games also have interstitials, banners, pretty much maximize the potential on the ad monetization side. So for us to integrate the ads as efficiently as possible, especially if we're talking about games that are heavy in purchases, so this is key. So it's not, the added value should be basically revenue on top and not to cannibalize in any way the purchases that we can generate, mostly based on the percentage of success that we can grow the ad side of the business versus the purchase side of the business. So everything is very tailor-made. Each game has its own separate integration protocol, and pretty much everything is very advanced and very tailor-made to the user base and the game flow that we have.
Cool, thank you. Nate, can you also give us a glance maybe of the setup you have at Kolibri across your games?
Sure. So because all of our games are the same genre, we generally see pretty similar results or splits between the different titles. It usually is around 50-50 for ads and IAPs. There's some, give and take. If we do some optimizations on one side, it might grow, or on the other side. But generally, it kind of holds there. Initially, when we launched Idle Miner Tycoon, we only had ads. We only added in-app purchases after users who are like hardcore fans started requesting ways to advance further, faster. They actually wanted to spend money, which is always a good thing. So we added them. Now that we're releasing kind of more and more new titles, we understand the flow of the users moving through the game. So we know when they're going to come back. We know the type of the sort of motivation they have when it comes to when they want to watch ads and how many they actually want to see. So we begin testing ads much earlier when we're launching new titles. It's more important for us to make sure that we're hitting a certain number of ads in this case, and a certain percentage of ad engagements instead of, say, like certain revenue metrics. We're not really worried about CPMs in the very beginning. We're not really worried about IAP related metrics in the very beginning. It's more about engagement of features and of ad features later on once we start testing or trying to scale our marketing. So we're looking at CPI versus LTV. At that point, we're optimizing some of those other metrics, and those types of revenue figures become much more important. But early on, that's not really our focus.
Cool. And if we're thinking about Nate, just coming back to you for a second, about the structure you have in place, how does that work? Do you work with a mix of bidders and mediated networks, and what would be the advantage maybe in using more bidders than loads of networks that would be mediated maybe from an operational perspective?
Yeah, so when we first started using bidders, there was actually there were very few bidder networks, and some of them weren't able to scale tremendously well. So in the very beginning, it was mostly just waterfall and 3 or 4 bidders. Now bidder derived revenue represents over 50% of our total revenue. So there's been a strong shift over time. So we still use a hybrid approach when it comes to our waterfall. We still have these bidders and these waterfall networks. And now the strategy is a bit different. So one thing we found is that a lot of the waterfall networks still drive a lot of revenue. And some of them are really good for kind of specialty purposes, specialty markets, certain ad types. So if we're looking for more brand ads, it's good to have a mix. And so in some cases, these specialty networks will represent 10% or more of the total available volume in their respective markets. So we do kind of a mix there. We still A/B test a lot, all of the different line items, but are able to let the bidders sort of run as they do. I think at this point we're probably only communicating maybe once a week with the waterfall networks if they're not self-serve, much less frequently with the bidders, except in 2 cases. Number one is actually Facebook, because we have other business relationships with Facebook, like social media and things like this. So yeah, we talk, but not to our ad monetization. And so that's still kind of just, runs smoothly, which is great. And then of course, we, since we do use the Max product by AppLovin, we're talking about other Max related things that aren't necessarily related to bidding specifically, like data APIs and maybe less interesting things. So our strategy has definitely shifted a lot from, say, a year ago when we were spending hours, or maybe 2 years ago, hours and hours trying to figure out the right line items from all of the networks we're using. Maybe Huuuge is seeing something similar.
Cool. Adi?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, obviously we use a hybrid approach as well. So for us, it's more of a consideration of how much do we want to give an advantage for the bidders compared to the waterfalls, meaning that it's less of a consideration of, let's put it like this, we don't need to invest as much time into the optimization of the waterfalls compared to what we have a few years back when we had less bidders on one side. On the other side, it's more tricky to balance the bidders versus the waterfall, meaning that you need to be a bit more aggressive with the waterfalls. You need to push a little bit higher in some cases. Obviously, it all comes down to which network do you have inside the waterfall or are able to compete. As an example, if we're talking about max mediation, then using AdMob, who is not a bidder, using Unity, who is currently not a bidder, and so on. So we need to find a way to still maximize some networks that we do see potential with, especially for specific genres of game. And obviously to still utilize as much as we can from the bidders themselves. We'll obviously need less maintenance these days. On the other hand, we do focus more on the tech side of things, meaning to understand fully what the mediation logic and how that works. There are some differences of the way that each request is being sent to the waterfall or the bidder. So more or less tweaking the tech side of things to actually push a little bit more on both sides.
Cool. Okay, cool. So now if we're talking about, so we know that casual days, they're optimizing their revenue through ads. But at the same time, you want to ensure like a kind of a good user experience. I guess the first point to be talking about here is that what are really the metrics, kind of metrics you're looking at, Nate?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, good user experience is key to us. We always say that we want to be the #1 player-driven idle games company in the world. And so for us, that means like we're broadly as a company, we're looking at star rating and reviews and frequency of reviews and complaints and things like this, pretty closely. That stuff is really important, and we have a lot of feedback channels, between community management and the product team. But drilling down a little bit closer on the ad monetization side, #1, as sort of funny as it sounds, we just look at total revenue, and this is really important for us if we're A/B testing. So from day to day, major total revenue changes actually, in our A/B testing is something that we want to pay attention to. We look a lot at ARPDAU and eCPMs, of course, for network performance or relative performance. And that's important, I think, if we're trying to evaluate, what kind of optimizations we can do just on like sort of the network side. And then on the product side, it's important for us to look at the number of ads watched per daily active user or viewer, both, as well as the engagement percentages. So we having had, a number of idle games, we have a pretty clear idea of, okay, here's the right number of ads every player should watch in their lifetime. Here's how much they're going to be watching per day. And here's the percentage of users who will just never watch an ad. And this is okay too. So we like understand where that is and how we can be optimizing on product. And then when it comes to like, the overall look, we just roll everything into LTV. And the reason we do this is that it takes into account retention. So if we start, pummeling our users with ads, which we don't do, but if we were, we would see that pretty immediately in retention. That's not something that's an ideal scenario. So regardless, we're looking at LTV because it takes retention into account. And then, of course, this is information that is immensely useful for the user acquisition team who need that in order to run their campaigns. So the short answer is a lot and everything.
Cool. Would that be done in a similar way at Huuuge Games, Adi?
I think for us, we have a few elements that we always take into consideration. So first of all is the user experience. I want to avoid any situation in which, as an example, I think the best case is when a user starts as a non-paying user, suddenly become a paying user. So we obviously don't want to block a freemium feature in that game. Obviously, it leads to negative feedback and so on. So this is one element that we need to find a good enough solution. Usually we find a capping model and the frequency and everything that match to what the user had in the past. Basically, we don't take anything away, but we might not be more aggressive later on if the user has continued to be a non-paying user. So that from a user experience perspective, as an example. The second thing is, and I think this is Very valid point for people who are doing UA. In the end of the day, we need to sell the traffic. So obviously, I would prefer to only monetize non-paying users and users that we don't believe has any value for us. In most cases, if users don't have value for us, statistically speaking, lower value for whoever is buying from us. So we also want to balance the quality of the traffic that we sell in the end of the day. So avoiding showing ads to paying user in this example is not something that has a very good contribution to overall CPM over time. So as an example, if someone would buy my traffic and eventually block this because I'm selling only non-paying users who don't show any value for them, obviously overall we damage the revenue that we can generate through ads. So we do want to continue showing ads to paying users as much as we can, which leads to the third factor that we always need to consider, especially if we're talking about games that are very heavy in a purchase model. So number one priority, obviously not to cannibalize any in a purchase. So in this case, it's mostly of how we integrate the ads inside the game, meaning that if a user usually buys coins, in most cases we would give a different type of reward. Ideally, if it's something that can even boost the sync of that user and eventually give a better experience and make the session time longer, more sessions per day, this is an ideal situation, especially if we're talking about paying users, that you want them to keep buying even more by using reward video mechanics. So we still want to give them the ads experience, but the reward type, the reward amount, everything is very tailor-made and pretty much built specifically for those type of users to still give them a good experience, to still watch rewarded videos, make it efficient for them, also efficient for us to keep them pushing and also play the game a little bit more.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point and like super important to be treating users separately. Like Nate, how does that work at Kolibri when you're running A/B test or any kind of segmentation? And I think we just talked about it earlier on. Can you tell us a bit about Edgar?
Oh yeah, sure. So like overall, like because we don't have when it kind of comes to like treating users differently. We have mostly rewarded videos, so we let everybody see them, mainly because even our paying users get really upset when they can't watch any ads. We get a lot of complaints. I think we were pretty lucky, kind of post acquisition, in that we could start to devote a lot of our time and energy and effort into building a CRM for our players, into building A/B testing, and actually like starting to use that. So outside of the A/B testing that we're doing, just within the waterfall, which most of the players will never notice. We also have begun A/B testing more of our product related things. And so one of them was actually a pretty cool story. So we noticed in a lot of games that there are, as a rewarded video placement, there are typically like some sort of like random event generator. So like you'll be playing a game and maybe you'll see like a little bird, flapping by, and then you click on the bird and it's like, oh, do you want, some coins for watching a rewarded video? And we had tried previously, sort of similar to what it sounds like, Huuuge had tried. Like we had put placements within our storefront for people who are looking for more soft currency or hard currency. We put placements where they could just watch rewarded video ads and immediately get what they were looking for. And it actually didn't monetize very well. Like there weren't as many people going to the store and there weren't as many people clicking on those, and their payout wasn't high enough. So we were kind of like gun shy when it came to that particular type of placement. But we knew it was successful for other developers. So we decided, all right, other games have birds or like, speedboats or whatever. We have a mining game. Let's try a mining thing. So we created this little character. It was a mole, like a little, kind of a furry animal, digs through the ground. And we had that as like a pop-up within the game, within Idle Miner Tycoon. So if users click on it, they can watch an ad. Okay, so we tried it. We put our best into it, our best character design. And what was crazy is that users really, really, really loved it. So yeah, we were tracking on the LTV side. LTV went up. It didn't impact our IAPs. It did not impact our other ad metrics. But at the same time, the players were just really into this character. So we gave him a name. We named him Edgar. He's this little mole. And then because the response was so high, we actually built that into a broader part of our game. So we gave him his own event. There was the Edgar event. You had to get to the bottom of the Edgar mine. We wrapped that into a broader season. So at the same time that we were dropping the Edgar mine, we were dropping some new features, which were really cool. And in fact, it went so well, we were even featured by the App Store for this, which was super cool. So I think, it's kind of like a nice illustrative story of things that you're doing, within ad monetization don't need to stay just within ad monetization. The players view your game not as a collection of a bunch of different departments, but they see it as like this broader whole. And I think, if you kind of approach it that way and take a step back and see like how they're actually engaging with the game, it means that these types of opportunities, can really start to shine out.
Cool. Thank you both. So I guess you've also been using AppLovin software solution, including our bidder max and on the UA side, our AdWords optimizer. Adi, can you maybe talk about how this solution played a role in optimizing and growing your apps? And maybe you want to talk about traffic puzzle.
Okay. Okay. So we had experiences in which we switched mediation. We used another one and then switched into Max. So first of all, the first thing we saw was an increase in the amount of impressions. So one of the things that many mediations don't provide, or at least normally provide, are latency reports. So that's something that we started to see, obviously an immediate increase in the amount of impressions that we can generate. So obviously lead to some investigation on the latency issues and everything else. Overall, it came to a realization that one of the bidding mechanics was a main factor on this being true. So this is an example of just by switching the tech stack, we could have maximized more impression out of the existing user base that we have. But in addition to that, I think maybe something that we utilize the most is the impression level that we can get through the mediation and the use case that we can do. So I'm not saying this is something that necessarily everyone can do, but once we start to connect this into some data science capabilities that we have, into prediction models, if someone is going to be a non-paying user, also segmenting users by their CPM, in addition also LAT, something that we use it heavily for, not necessarily on the impression level data, but filling the gaps of some of the data that we have by using those type of data sets. So gave us a lot of opportunities in which we can actually maximize the amount of revenue that we can generate by just having a deeper segmentation, a deeper pricing model and everything else. So it's something that we're tweaking and revising all the time. I can say that Max played a role in that factor, not necessarily just the tech itself, but obviously due to a lot of innovation, at least on our side, on what we can do and how sophisticated we think we can take it further.
Thank you, Adi. Nate, how did that work for you on your different games and on your latest one, Idle Firefighters?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things, right? When we first integrated on the monetization side in Idle Miner Tycoon, having previously used mediation, we were never really too concerned about, say, fill rates, which I think is something that for some developers is a bigger problem. Most of our traffic is in the US, UK, Western Europe, so fill is pretty good. But what we did notice on the monetization side is that because we were able to A/B test, because we had lower latency, we saw immediately, ad ARPDAUs in certain key markets increased by anything from 5 to 10%, which was really cool. I think the other thing that we found that was pretty helpful tech-wise when it came to scaling the games, in the very, very early days of Idle Miner Tycoon, we were monetizing with AppLovin, and so we were able to more easily see and scale our user acquisition campaign. So because we had all of the data in a fairly closed loop, it was much at that time that, it was much easier to grow Idle Miner Tycoon rather quickly, because we could see, okay, well, here's the ad revenue we're getting, and we have this little pipeline that puts in the IAP revenue. Okay, then this is how much the campaigns are worth, right? It's relatively straightforward. Nowadays, in particular with Idle Firefighter Tycoon, we have a version of that that's actually working quite well. So we do user acquisition with Idle Firefighter Tycoon. The evolution of our games when we start spending, usually for new titles, is that we'll run a test on Facebook, which is pretty key. We run a test on Unity, but once it actually takes time, once it's time to scale, we're looking at all the networks that we can possibly be scaling on. And what we found with actually with AppLovin that's pretty helpful is we do ad ROAS campaigns. So because we're so ad revenue dependent, maybe not as much as like a hyper casual game, but fairly ad revenue dependent, we can see, I think, like 20 on like day 0, we can get ROAS numbers of like 25% of the total revenue that we're going to be making for a campaign, which is great. So we can start scaling these newer games this way. And we can also typically run IAP and ad ROAS campaigns simultaneously. So I think that's like really key for us, is that we aren't focused on a particular one or the other, since it's 50% of revenue, and those campaigns are not competing against each other, which I think for us is really important, because we don't want to like outbid ourselves or something and have that kind of a problem. So we're not cannibalizing users. I think like 80% of like our UA spend there and firefighters with AppLovin, and it's also pretty successful for us because we can do cross promotion within our other titles, within Idle Miner Tycoon. So which is counterintuitively, it's like better to spend sometimes on yourself than to like force an ad through cross promotion other ways. So I think, like, generally speaking, when it comes to that, to those new games, it's been a great way to kind of gain additional market share relatively rapidly, and with a reasonably small team, with the 3 or 4 people that are actively working on this title.
Cool, thanks, Nate. Back to Tom for a moment. So Tom, how do you think that basically adding this ad element within games are helping game developers to run UA?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest benefit really is if you're not running ads inside your games, you're not able to reinvest the revenue you get back into user acquisition. So if you're just doing IAP, you're missing out on this huge budget that you could use otherwise. So that could be either through more whale hunting, or it could be through acquiring more users who only monetize through in-app advertising. So that's really the main benefit there. But also, you were talking about user experience. So we know that app bidding increases revenue for publishers. We see anything from about 5 to 30%, but it also decreases the cost for advertisers as well. So you may ask, why does that marry up? And the answer is because there's fewer weighted impressions. Advertisers pay less, publishers get more, and users get a better user experience overall.
Cool, thank you, Tom. And so Nate, just earlier on, you mentioned, when you were serving rewarded videos, that actually your paying users were eager to watch more. So did you see like an increase in retention when you were like adding more rewarded videos as well? And I think the other questions I have, and for Adi as well, is that does adding this ad element also allowed you to basically, as Tom said, reinvest that money and maybe run UA in some markets that you guys were not running before?
Yeah, I can start. So adding additional rewarded placements is definitely key for extending our the LTVs, and it's definitely something that our whales want us to be doing. So for us, we kind of hit like if you look at our total ads watch per user, like it's definitely on the higher end. And we have more and more placements for them to be able to watch. So we make sure that, you know, within the game that there's always an opportunity. And in particular, we see that there's some shifting when it comes to our events. So places that people are not watching ads like in the regular part of the game, you know, maybe because the rewards are like relatively smaller, they will engage with those placements if there's an event going on that they're really invested in, if they really want a trophy or they really want the rewards so that they can complete a season. Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a pretty essential strategy, I think, if you're trying to maintain engagement. And again, we know because, you know, if there's a problem, whatever, like a server burns down and we're not getting ads for like a few hours, like the users are exceptionally vocal about those issues. Usually they're a bit paranoid. They're like, oh, are you doing this so we spend more money? We're like, no, just wait a minute. And, you know, we'll reboot those servers or call up Amazon and ask them what the heck is going on. But it's pretty key.
Cool. Adi, same question for you, I guess. And can you tell me as well, did you also expand maybe your scope when it comes to UA? Like, I don't really like this term of tier 2, tier 3, but did you also expand your campaigns into other geos?
Generally speaking, yeah. But again, it's not necessarily just different geos. I think especially in the last few months, CPIs are increasing across the board. I think most channels, you know, especially in the, you know, tier 1 countries, everything's becoming super expensive, you know, everywhere. So I think adding the ad monetization, having another source of monetizing users, especially if you can know in advance the quality of the users that you're buying. As an example, something that we do is we started to actually very closely match the quality that we see on the ad revenue side with the source. As an example, CPE campaigns, offer walls, things like this, we usually see very high ad revenue in the very early stages of the game. Later on, it might decay a little bit more, but as an example, a very specific source that we can actually utilize very high ad revenue in the first stages of the game compared to another source. Another example is that we can actually expand the DAU, the daily active user base, across all games by having another source of monetization, especially if we know in advance that the quality of those users is not necessarily matching for something that will eventually become paying users. So just by having very different monetization with ads for those type of users, we can actually expand much further, like what Nate said. We can actually not necessarily just hunt whales all day long, especially in times that CPIs are rising. We can actually be much more diverse in the UA strategy that we have. We can have either very heavy performance UA campaigns that are actually looking for those whales like we did in the past. We can have anything that is very ad heavy and very based on low CPIs on one hand, but users that we think that can lead to very high ad LTV later on, and basically anything in between. So it opens a lot of opportunities on the UA side, especially during these times when you have to be more flexible, not necessarily hunt the whales like everyone is doing in the last few years.
Cool. So I guess if you had a few tips, and we surely have some indie devs watching us today, so what would be your recommendation for studios who want to kind of have that approach? And the other question, it would be good, Nate and Adi, to have your input on how would you pick the right partners to work with? Because we know like some teams don't have like many people working, and how would they pick networks? Like, would you put in favor of bidders versus mediated network? I guess because we have to think about the operational efficiencies as well when you're such a lean team. So maybe on the first point, I guess, Tom, if you could give us a couple of recommendations for studios who want to have that approach. Be good to have Adi and Nate's insight as well on that.
Yeah, sure. So let's take it from the in-app advertising perspective first. So if you're just using in-app advertising, you want to introduce new features to increase the retention and then balance the ad frequency. So you're probably used to making the most out of ad monetization as quickly as possible, but you can lower that ad frequency. You might find that you will find that your ad revenue will go down, but overall your LTV will increase, and just incrementally experiment with that. On the in-app purchase side, if that's everything you're doing, you might want to experiment just with showing ads to 1% of your users, scale that to 5%. You might want to look at just one ad placement to start or one entry point and scale through there. If advertising is done badly, it can be negative to your overall revenue. If it's done really well, it can improve your in-app purchases. So you make more through in-app advertising, but also through in-app purchases as well. In terms of partners to work with, so I work at Facebook. I highly suggest you work with Facebook. Obviously, Google and lots of other smaller networks are out there. And in terms of which mediation partner to work with, we've worked with Max and AppLovin for 5 years since we started doing app bidding. But also, if you have a look on our website, that's facebook.com/audience network, nice and easy. You can see a run through of all the different mediation partners on there.
Cool. And maybe we can go back to that. What is the future for Facebook? Facebook bidding. You've been a strong advocate for bidding for years, as you've mentioned. Do you plan Facebook full bidding within the next year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good point, actually. For Facebook, all iOS apps should already be on bidding. And by the 30th of September, so put that in your diary, by the 30th of September, all Android apps need to be moved over to bidding as well. And really, bidding is the start of what's to come. It's very much business as usual from this point on. And so, in a few more weeks, we will be publishing a report on our website. It's called the App Monetization Industry Outlook Report, which goes into the kind of the future there. So keep an eye on the website. You can drop me on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Tom. Adi, maybe a couple tips for our developers, and also what kind of recommendation you'd have when it comes to a network you want to work with.
I think the best advice I can give, especially for a small publisher, is work with the biggest. And the major networks, again, most of them support bidding. Depends on the mediation, obviously, but I don't think it's need to necessarily overcomplicate things. I'm sure that any developer these days are getting approached on a daily basis with LinkedIn's offers. I have a very high CPM and this and that, and when it comes down to that, it's not really realistic or not, especially if you compare those type of partners to the larger ones. So I believe in full transparency when talking to partners. So my first conversation is always, can you take 5% share of voice or higher? So if the number doesn't really doesn't meet this factor, in most cases I don't need another SDK, more technical issues, and more potential more calls, more optimization. So again, if the revenue is justified, makes sense. If not, then again, it's another source to be optimizing, another weekly call, or again, another source of potential pains. So stick with the largest ones. But that being said, it's not obviously it's not a one or two partners type of game. Still need to have very good competition. Something just to connect to what Nate said earlier on. If you do have specific user base in specific geos, or you need some kind of tailor-made solutions, then obviously in some cases you need to have a tailor-made partner. So I don't know. As an example, if you have a very large user base in Thailand or Philippines, then you might need to have a dedicated network that is very strong in that specific geo. But if we're talking about global tier one type of traffic, then I say stick to the basics, unless you have any specific needs, like branding. You need to have branding networks for that to work, or any other specific solution that you need.
Cool, makes sense. Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Adi made a bunch of really great points there. Overall, the complexity that you need probably just scales pretty linearly with the total revenue and size of your user base. When you're starting out very, very, when we start out with our small tests, we're only, monetizing with like a single network just to understand if the games are working. I think for most of the indies, if they're not going to be, if they're having trouble breaking out of just like, sort of our test size, which for Huuuge is probably like, that's their prototype size, right? Like, then it's not necessary to really focus on adding a bunch of different monetization sources and new partners, because there's not going to be a huge return on one's investment. I think when it comes to which partners to pick as you're beginning to grow, there's a few key factors, right? When it comes to the mediator, you want to make sure that you have a mediator where you understand, how you understand simple things. How does the dashboard work? Does this make sense? Is it relatively easy to add new SDKs to this mediator, or is this mediator complicated? Is this, reasonably well-known mediator? Do they have tools like A/B testing? That's very important to us, at least in the beginning. Do they have maybe some more sophisticated things we can try later, like APIs that eventually will be plugging into some sort of a data stack? Yeah, that's important. I think other things that are important tend to be on, like, say, just the ad monetization partners. I am probably biased towards more bidding. We tried, I don't even know if we should say this, but we had Facebook as a waterfall, and then we tried it as a bidder. It was going pretty great, and we're like, well, I wonder what would happen if we just switch it back to waterfall. It was a terrible move. So generally speaking, bidder is the future, I think, and that's probably the direction that most of the newer developers or more indie developers want to be looking. Like in terms of operations, there's just very little you have to do once it's set up and running, other than just make sure it works, and you can focus on other things. I think if you're trying to leverage your time, to have the greatest effect, you'll probably make more in the long run if you have sort of like one and done bidders just running by themselves, and then working to optimize placements, thinking in terms of product. In terms of, how can we make sure that these rewards are compelling enough that users are engaging with them? That will probably go a lot further than, just minor tweaks on the networks. Outside, again, of things like what Adi said when it comes to like, regions or platforms or things like that, where you need extra help. But I think for most indies, that's probably not necessarily something that they need to focus on.
Cool. Thank you, guys. That was really, really insightful. I guess we might have like 15 minutes for some question, Julia.
Hey guys, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. Well, we don't have the questions from the audience, but I do have a question for you. Actually, for some of you, maybe. So how can developers increase eCPM of bidding networks? Can they use non-bidding networks to do that? Maybe Nate can answer.
Yeah, generally the thinking around bidding networks that you can do. So I think bidder density is pretty important. So that's the total number of bidders. So, the rule when it comes to ad networks usually is that the more competition, the better. So if you only have, like, I guess that's one thing we sort of left out from the previous answer, you'll need a few bidders for the bidders to work. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work very well. So you need to have a little bit of competition there. So that would definitely help. Having some waterfall networks, I think at the right spots should help to drive up overall CPMs. So you might just see that the bidders aren't taking a lot of like the lower impressions. And that combined with the bid density, I think should probably increase your bidder CPMs. Does it sound about right, guys?
Yeah, no, yeah, I'd agree with the bid. Go on, Adi.
All right. Yeah. Does anyone want to add something?
No. I think. Sorry, guys. No. Just to echo on what Ned said, you do need some competition. Yeah. if you surely have just one bidders, like your CPMs are going to be extremely low. And as you said, from an operational perspective, it's not much work to add a few bidders. So you do want that competition in there.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Actually, today's conversation has shown us that bidding is more or less quickly becoming business as usual, you know? So what's next when it comes to app monetization? Maybe Tom can take this question.
So thanks, Julia. Yeah, so really, as I said, bidding is as usual, and bidding is the new normal. Really, disruption is always a catalyst to innovation, right? So it's about what comes next. If you're saving, I work with Pixel Federation, and Michal, if he's out there watching, hey, I think they save 30% of their time managing their waterfall, and that's now 30% of their time that they can spend doing other things, measuring which formats work best, which ad placements, and all of these things. So I think that's the key thing there, is that the time that it gets back. The money in your pocket's fantastic, but my time is pretty important, as I'm sure it is for everyone else on the video.
All right, thank you. Probably time for one more question, if you don't mind, guys. So could you please share tips and strategies for indies to set up waterfall? For many of them, it can be tricky, I guess, but maybe you can give some, short guide.
Okay, I think I can start. I think one of the most common mistakes I've seen is either going too heavy or too light, meaning that either you have too many line items in the waterfalls or way, not enough. So again, there isn't really a rule of thumb. I think each network that you'll ask this question, you'll get a slightly different answer, but it depends on the scale of the game, meaning that if you have, 5,000 impressions per day overall for your app, doesn't really make sense for you to try to, to have too much line items in that waterfall, especially if you have bidders as well. So again, the overall proportion, something that you need to consider, that someone need to buy this traffic from you. If you sell, 1,000 impression at best, it leads to 1, 2, 3, 10 installs to whoever is buying from you. And it's not just one, it's most likely 1,000 of advertisers. So it's something that you need to take into consideration, that in the beginning, if you have low scale, then most likely you won't be optimizing too much, meaning that have a light waterfall, not too many networks, or at least not too many price points in the beginning, especially if you're using bidders as well. As you progress, as you grow, you will add more and more, and until you reach some kind of a sweet spot and balance. Obviously, overall, the top performing network should eventually go top, mid. The bottom one should be medium and the bottom. But generally speaking, you'll see that the type of logic develops over time once you start to scale up. But don't try to be over sophisticated in the beginning, because long-term wise doesn't really justify the amount of effort that you will be investing versus the amount of revenue that you will be getting, at least in the beginning.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. And Nate, do you want to add something maybe, or that was enough?
Sure. I think the only thing I would add, I think that was a pretty good answer, is just to remember to monitor these line items. If it's your waterfall specifically, that's something that I see a lot, where people will set up line items and they're like only looking at it once a week or once every 2 weeks if they're really small. And then sometimes there's a line item in there that is broken. It's it's set at $40 in your waterfall, but it's really only delivering a $4 CPM, which it happens to the best of us. But whereas, if we're looking at it every day or every other day, we can catch that pretty quickly. We set up alerts. For indies, they just need to make sure they keep an eye, just some sort of a pulse check every day. Like, okay, is there a massive change in my ad monetization? Oh, what could be the reason? And then to occasionally, check that on the network side that their dashboards, read essentially the same as wherever you're viewing it in your mediation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys, for your answers. I think that's it. Thanks again for a very insightful conversation. I hope that our viewers learned a lot, and you did a great job. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, and
Thanks.
I hope to see you offline one day as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.